what to do in this time, this crazy time of the coronavirus, and we're all stuck at home, and we are trying to figure it out together. And so, as we're working together at IPPI Learning Academy and school consultation in the school department, we're trying to figure out how best to serve kids, how best to work with our families, how best to do all of these things. So we kind of just wanted to reach out to other people and see if we can't work together to get through this together. So the last couple weeks, we've been talking a little bit about mindfulness. And for those of you who didn't hear it last week, our definition that we chose was Jon Kabat-Zinn's definition of mindfulness, which is the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. And we got no questions this week about it. So what we decided to do is kind of just have a conversation about some things that we've been doing and maybe how we can help support you all to bring some moments of being present into your day during distance learning or just into your regular schedule. This isn't easy for anybody. It's not easy for us as individuals, as parents, as professionals. And so we wanted to kind of try out a couple of things on our own, either working with kids or doing it with our own children, and figuring out what kinds of things were coming up for us during this week. And I wanted to encourage you to ask us some questions, because that's why we're here. We're here to kind of have this conversation to help each other out. So if you have questions on Facebook, just put it in the comment section, and if you're attending via Zoom, you could just type it in the chat. So I want to get started and talk a little bit about some of the things that we were sidebarring right before. And Chrissy, I want to start with you and talk a little bit about what you were saying about the craziness of having 3 kids at very different ages.
Yes, oh my gosh. So we have talked a lot about mindfulness and self-care, and how are we managing at home with jobs and kids and distance learning, and just how can we support each other as a community and not be judgmental, to go back to that word, because we all, as moms, as parents, dads out there, we're all very judgmental of ourselves, and we need to stop. We need to stop that. And I please don't think I practice what I preach, because I do not. It's something that is an ongoing struggle for all of us. So my homework kind of was self-care and mindfulness with teenagers. And I know, Liz, your kids are younger, and Katie, your kids are younger. And here I am the lucky parent of an 8-year-old in 3rd grade, a 8th grader, and an 11th grader. And parenting teenagers, folks, is no joke. And it is not for the faint of heart in normal times. And so now during this pandemic, it's really hard. So my son is 17, and he's suddenly nocturnal, which I'm hearing from a lot of other parents out there that teenagers have. I feel like I have an infant again. He has his days and nights mixed up. So I had to really think about what are my expectations for my 17-year-old, who's this big man boy and, is kind of struggling for his independence. And academically, he struggles. He's got attentional issues. He's got certainly lots of organizational issues. So how do I help him be nocturnal, but still make sure that I have expectations for, what he gets done for school, as well as his role in our family. So some of the things I started to think about as far as mindfulness, and we've been talking a lot about it, and I'm reading and I'm thinking, oh my God, if I ask him to do this, he's just going to laugh at me or think I've just, lost it. So we've really instituted this idea of the 2 things you have to do in your day are show up for dinner. So you better be up and awake. I know that seems ludicrous at dinner time. That's like essentially his breakfast. And your schoolwork needs to get done. So I know we're setting the bar low, but it's a start. And this has really been a struggle. And the lines are so blurred for all of us around, we're working from home, this is our family, and now our work is in our home. And someone said to me yesterday, like, I'm really struggling with that. And I thought, oh my God, that's so true. So how do we bring the focus back to the family, as opposed to it's all about work and it's all about school? Because now that's in your house, right? So one of the things we've done at dinner is, we've always had a no electronics at the dinner table rule. So no electronics, even if you're 17 and you're bigger than me, too bad. Like, you're not allowed to have electronics at the table. And we always have like a question of the day. And that's kind of like the only little bit of mindfulness that I'm squeaking in with him right now. So it's really scheduled. And it's been an expectation of, you show up and then you listen when others are speaking, and then you have to share. So I've learned that I really have to guide that. So I might ask one day, what is something you're grateful for today? What is something really good that happened to you, since the last time we had dinner? Share something you're really worried about. Share something that you really miss, that now that we're not in school. And that's been super helpful. But I gotta be honest, guys, like I'm still struggling,
Does he take it seriously?
My colleagues. He does, sometimes he'll try to say, I don't have an answer. And I'm like, all right, great, we'll come back to you then.
Yeah.
So when we get back to you and when we go around the table, have that answer. But I really, like, if it wasn't for the supports, I think of like you guys and you phone your friends and you're asking for, what are you guys struggling with the same thing? Because I fall into that judgmental trap of, I'm not getting him to do what I need him to do. He's not a big talker, as most teenage boys are not. So he's not sharing his feelings. He's not, sitting down and having these big, long conversations about what's going on in his life or how he feels about what's going on in the world. So I really need to work on structuring that into his day. So
I have a question for you.
Oh dear.
And
Go
maybe
ahead.
this is no. And maybe this is just me, but so I'm listening to you talking. I'm like, wow, this is really great. And I'm like, okay, this is something that I think I could probably work into. Like, and we do a little bit of that at meals. And I don't think my kids are little, so they eat it up. But what do you do on the days? Because there's got to be those days when you don't feel like doing it, when you don't feel like showing up. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, because that's a real thing. And I think, we've talked about this whole idea of self-compassion and being, kind of lightening up on yourself, but we have this responsibility as parents, right? So what do you do? Tell me.
I was just telling you guys before this started that I participated in a live conference on Saturday, and that was like the theme. So it's funny that you ask that, of even when you don't feel like it, you still have to show up, because it was this whole thing about leadership, and you don't think about us being leaders in our homes. Like I never thought of that concept. Like we're if you're a parent, you're a leader of your family. And that when someone mentioned that in this conference I did, I thought, oh my gosh, you're so right. I never thought of it that way. So even when you're not feeling it, you still got to show up for these kids. And it's so funny that you asked that question, because one night I wasn't feeling it, and the littlest one said, hey, are we going to share our high for the day?
Oh, I love that.
Like it now, it means something, like they're waiting for it. So that was really cool. So they hold us accountable, certainly. Yeah. Those kids are holding us accountable. They really are. So yeah, so I would love more tips from you girls who know a lot more about mindfulness than I do on how to engage a cranky teenage boy.
So I actually had a thought that just occurred to me, but I was thinking about, I don't know what your son's preferred activities are, but I know I have two older sisters, and one of them is an avid tennis player. And so for her, like actually participating in tennis is essentially a mindfulness activity for her.
Yeah.
She's explained to me before that it's like, and she has 3 kids that are now grown, but I think especially when they were younger, for her, it was this time that was just her time. And the only thing that she could think about is connecting with the ball. Like that's very present moment awareness. That's really all that you can kind of do and focus on. So I think for some kids who, I think of sports in particular, but if there's but like for some kids who like to play an instrument, I think there are other kind of ways that you can engage in mindfulness without practicing sort of a specific like mindfulness strategy or activity, which isn't to say that those activities don't have any meaning, but I think sometimes we need to be a little bit creative in terms of how we're conceptualizing mindfulness, because I think if we're thinking about it as just kind of present moment awareness and being non-judgmental, there are a lot of different ways that you can accomplish that. So those would be kind of some things that I would think about. Like, are there any activities that your son kind of already engages in that could be kind of mindfulness times for him? I don't know. I just thought of that.
No, that's great.
I
definitely think so. And I think, oh, sorry, Katie, go ahead.
No, go ahead. The other thing I was thinking of is, so one of the activities that I did with my kids was very similar to what Lisa did at the end of the last session, the 5 senses, like, tell me things that you see here. And like my kids, like Liz was saying, they're little, so they eat it up and they look forward to it. But like, would your son respond to a text? Like if you just texted him and like you said, hey, tell me 5 things that you see in your room right now. I see, and like you kind of went back and forth, like, oh, I hear birds chirping. What are you hearing in your video game? Like, I wonder if he would even respond to text.
Idea.
I like that idea.
That's a really good idea.
I mean, he's gonna think you're corny, but you might
Oh, he does anyway. Yeah. I'm past that. I think for the older kids, you know, they're so social, right? Like they're so used to that social piece of school. So just even acknowledging that, and I know not social media, I shouldn't say that right now, but they're FaceTiming and they're playing video games together, but it's just not the same. So I do think that there's a lot of feelings for our teenagers that they might not necessarily be sharing.
Well, and as you guys are talking, I'm thinking there's almost 2 different parts, or I'm almost kind of separating it out in my head a little bit in terms of mindfulness. So I'm thinking about like my kids outside of the school day. And that's where I see some of those things like you were talking about, Lisa, where they are very involved in the sports aspect. They're riding bikes, they're doing those things. And I think that's their outlet. But then, so there's that, and being in the present moment with those kinds of activities that are already lower stress, like regular life kinds of things. And then there's this whole piece, which I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this too, of school. So like, right, Chrissy, so your son his schedule in school is totally off. Whereas maybe for the younger kids, we may be putting them on a specific schedule. And so for me, I know that like I have 2 kids, one of my kids, my older one, you hear me say it all the time, she'll do whatever, she's go with the flow. I always say she's my nice one, but they're both lovely. But my younger one, who is very strong-willed, it's hard to do all the school things, and she's working really hard at being more independent and all of that, but it's a struggle. So I'm finding that it's that building those kinds of things into school that I feel like it has been a struggle, has been more of a struggle for me. And it's a similar thing, just different ages, right? Chrissy, it's how do you work something that's not all that natural into a routine and make it part of a routine. So I don't know, it's almost 2 separate pieces, and that piece is different, you know?
Yeah, and I think, we were talking earlier about just making sure whatever mindfulness activity you're picking or whatever you're kind of deciding on is not aversive. So I think part of it is just practicing different activities for different kids for different ages. Because there are a ton of mindfulness activities, right? I practiced a couple this week with some kids that I had never done before. At least with those kids. So I think part of it is just figuring out like what works for your kids. And then either scheduling in a time, I think we talked about that, or like pairing it with an activity that they already kind of like doing, so that it starts to become part of their day. I mean, I know for me, I'm relatively new to mindfulness practice, kind of in general, but what's funny is the more I do it with kids, I feel like the better I get at it myself. So like the 5 senses activity, which is my favorite, I think, like I've started doing that kind of as part of my own day. So again, I think part of it is just kind of like practicing and figuring out what works. I mean, I was talking earlier about an activity that I did with a couple of middle school boys this week that I thought they were going to hate. Like I thought they were going to be like, oh, seriously. And it's a body scanning activity. So basically you're just kind of becoming aware of your body, like head to toe, one piece at a time, focusing on, areas that you might be kind of holding energy, areas where it's not so activated, areas that might need some work. So like I think of like my feet as always feeling tired, but just kind of becoming aware of that while you're breathing. And the kids that I tried it with, who are middle school boys, afterwards were kind of like, I like that. I would do that again. So I think sometimes we just have to try kind of a bunch of different things and kind of see what sticks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think you don't have to label it mindfulness either.
Yeah.
Like my kids have gotten to the point where the word is no longer something that bothers them. Mm-hmm. In the beginning, it was, I don't want to, because they just associate it with like doing something hippy dippy and like breathing. So I kind of had to shift away from that. And now, so I did the 5 senses with my kids. We did it right before bed. So we were kind of all snuggled up together. And then at the end, my older one said, okay, tomorrow let's do it somewhere different so that we have different experiences. I was like, wow, what a really good kind of thought of, she's like, I want to do it outside or in the bath or like kind of somewhere else where she could experience it. And I think there's a lot of fun mindfulness activities out there that we don't think of as mindful. Like I did a blindfolded taste test with my kids over the weekend, and they already have plans to do it with each other when I let them have breaks during the day. So you could make it fun and something where it's more of a game than an activity that they have to do. And that's easy to build into the school day.
Yeah. It's funny because Lisa, very similar to you, I was trying some of these exercises with some students I was working with, and I tried a heartbeat exercise. So it's something very simple that could be, woven into your day, but I had the student kind of get up and do a minute of jumping jacks. You could run in place or do jumping jacks. And then after I just said, how does your heart feel? How does your breathing feel? And just have him notice it just for a moment. And it was as simple as that. Mm-hmm. Obviously through distance learning, you have to have them get up and do it, but that could be as simple as if they're running outside or if they're, on their bikes, they could notice, okay, well, how does your heart feel? How do you feel right now? Notice how your body feels. And it could be a minute of noticing that. And as simple as that, I think, is also mindfulness. And like Katie says, it doesn't have to be, okay, right now, after you get off your bike, we're going to do mindfulness. We just, hey, pay attention to how your body's feeling. It could be something that's easy to put in place.
Yeah. And I think the more you try to structure something, the more aversive it might be, like with George. I mean, I think that might be for him. The more you try to structure it, the less likely he's going to be to engage. But I wonder if people might think, but if it's not structure, if I just do it like that, what is it doing? It's almost like you want to have some like tangible, something that you can see, the results. You want a result. So if I'm going to try this, if I'm going to go this route and try to be in the present moment, I want to see something as a result, but it's not something that you're just going to see, right away. I don't know. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I think that might be a struggle. It's like, or you might try something and my kid hates it and you're like, oh, forget this. They're not going to be into these kinds of things and give it up altogether.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple of things. So I think kind of going back to what Katie was saying in terms of mindfulness, like I think some people do have this word association with the word mindfulness and feeling like it is kind of this hippy dippy concept and like, why are we doing this? So for a lot of the kids that I work with, different programs often call mindfulness like just present moment awareness. So I think one, if we're coming up against some resistance about using the word mindfulness, like you could just call it something else, like just being in the moment or increasing your awareness or increasing, depending on the age of the kid, like you can call it present moment awareness. But I think I think that term also kind of lends itself a little bit to kind of that outcome piece, like in terms of if you're doing an activity, I think you can then check in on, okay, like, how does that feel? Like, how does your body feel right now? Like, what are you feeling just, after we've done this activity or this exercise? Because I think we get a lot of feedback that way from kids. I know that when I do some of these activities with kids and I just sort of then say, like, how did that feel for you? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? I think it's that like little second where I think there's some self-reflection for kids. And they can give you some good feedback or not so good feedback.
What do you say to the parents who are saying, well, my kid doesn't have a lot of language.
Mm-hmm.
And they, I don't know how I'm going to do this with my child who has autism or has an intellectual disability. How are you going to, how can we work this present moment awareness? And I actually love that term, present moment awareness. How do you work present moment awareness into their lives, or as a family unit? So
Mm-hmm.
how could you work that into the family unit when you have kids of varying abilities?
Mm-hmm.
I think modeling, similar to kids that are higher functioning too, I think modeling is part of it. So you have a student who might have limited verbal skills, but they still have the sense of touch. So you can get items that are various textures, for example, and just kind of talk about what you're feeling in the moment. Like, oh, I'm feeling this, it's so soft, and kind of making it more tactile and visual, then focusing on the verbal and the sitting and thinking, and instead just kind of experiencing it and kind of doing a talk aloud while they're doing it is kind of the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Mm-hmm. And I think of some activities that have a visual component as a good place to start, like even simple breathing activities that have like I'm thinking specifically of like the not super flex zones of regulation has a couple of breathing activities that come with visuals. So you can just sort of actually, because this is where I keep all my stuff. This is lazy 8 breathing. So essentially you just start at the star and kind of breathe in this way and then breathe out this way, a little slower than that. But that's basically it. And I think that that's a really great place to start for kids who might be lower functioning or who don't have a lot of language. I think it's really easy to model it that way too.
Mm-hmm.
See what you're doing as you're using that visual. But I think that's a good jumping off place.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's where using, pairing it with something that is really preferred is, right? If you're going to do something, pair it with something preferred while you're starting to do it. And then you're probably going to have a better outcome there.
Absolutely.
The idea is that you don't want to defeat the purpose by it being aversive, right? Or
right.
It's more of a punishment that they're having to do it than anything.
Right.
Yeah, and for the kids who are really resistant, I'm telling food is a good way to start, because any student, a child, you could give them a Skittle or a strawberry and kind of walk them through, what does it feel like in your hands? Can you smell it? And then they know that the natural reward is you're ultimately going to ask them what it tastes like. So and that's kind of getting a whole new experience. And I think that's enjoyable for kids, whether or not they have, intellectual disabilities or are neurotypical, or, I think that's enjoyable for anybody. It's interesting. It's a whole new experience with food.
And I think going back to your point, Katie, it's so important. Like, as you were saying this before, I thought, oh, I should probably do that better. The whole modeling piece, that if we're frustrated and we're stressed and we're not modeling how we then manage those feelings through mindful activities, how can we then expect our kids to do that? It's so important.
Did I tell my story? I can tell my story. I think I shared this with you. Maybe I told you too, Chrissy. I had put up breathing boards for my kids, and something happened, and I got very frustrated. And my older daughter said to me, "Mommy, maybe you should do some of these breathing boards." And I didn't take to it kindly, but I did. I noticed, but I noticed that I did it. And I did do the breathing boards later, but not in that moment because I was, I wasn't in a place where I could access it, but that's okay. That's where I was. I'm a work in progress like everybody else. It's already 10:25, so we are going to have to end our session. But before we do, I want to ask if there are any other strategies. Now, I do want to say we mentioned a whole lot of strategies today, or different types of mindfulness activities. We will make sure that if you're interested, there's access to all of those activities on our website, on our resource page, and we'll probably try to post those strategies in other accessible places too. Is there any other strategy that one of you guys used this week that you think would be particularly helpful, or that you just wanted to mention something real quick before that we can end on? Was there any other ones?
You know, I just wanted to mention my middle one, who's an 8th grader, and she is a talker and she is a feeling sharer. I don't know if it was a teacher at school or somebody had mentioned to her the idea of journaling her feelings through this pandemic. And that has been phenomenal for her. She takes the time and she just writes like what she might have heard that day or what's happening in the world that day. And that has really been so helpful for her. It keeps her focused. And she even said to me, who knows, Mom, someday my journal might be a book that somebody reads about what it was like for students in the pandemic. So, and she's totally a different kid, obviously, than the boys are here. But she, you know, it was such a great idea and such a great tool for her to just focus in the moment and focus on her feelings. So I did want to share that, because for some kids, I think that that's a really useful tool. Obviously not all kids, but some.
Yeah. And I almost wonder if we put up a list, an accessible list of some of these activities, like I would say just pick 1 or 2 and try them out for the week and sort of see how it goes, and then maybe circle back and see where you are next week.
And if you're in our live Facebook feed, they are posted in the comment section below this video.
Oh, it looks like Pat has put a comment on the side. They made bubble charts to show how everyone's behavior affects all of us. That's huge. And I think sometimes I model that for my kids too. I'll say like, I'm really angry because you did this, and I know I'm acting inappropriately. Like, I know I'm snapping at you and I shouldn't, but I'm really angry, and like kind of identifying it and scheduling. Yes, that's.
And also, I think it's important to note, she also mentioned in the comments, somebody who's looking around, following along with us here on Zoom, the importance of those live interactions with peers. I think going back to what I said before about the isolation piece for our kids, that you know, it's huge for them. And so having those opportunities to interact live, whether it's like in a classroom format through distance learning, or, you know, if folks are scheduling some time, you know, for the little ones, obviously you might need to schedule that, but for the teens, you know, just getting them on some kind of even a Zoom format, or, you know, in their FaceTiming or something like that, because they really do need those social interactions. This is really hard.
Yeah.
Thanks, Pat.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we would love to hear your comments, suggestions, questions that will kind of guide us through our discussion for next week. I think I'd like to continue this conversation, but I think bringing up this whole idea of these live interaction with kids or with peers, I think is a pretty important point, and maybe something that we can explore a little bit. We know that, you know, having a physical interaction, live interaction with somebody versus talking to somebody on Zoom is very, very different and requires a different set of social skills, which a lot of our kids have a lot of difficulty with. So that could be something that we can explore. If that's something that you're interested in, please leave us a message or some questions. Until then, we look forward to hearing from you, and we look forward to seeing you next week on our next live coffee talk, 10 a.m. next Tuesday. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.